Hi, so I'm going to talk about the Bradley Method natural birth of my daughter, Clara Pearl. This actually happened 2 years ago. It was on June 5th, 2015. And so I actually went into labor on the 4th, but it was in the middle of the night. And Clara is my second child. So I actually had a very interestingly similar birth in some ways to my first labor, which was with May. So I actually started having contractions about 15 minutes apart in the middle of the night, like 3:30 in the morning or so on the 4th. And it was exactly 1 week before I was due, which is exactly the same time that I went into labor with my first daughter. So just like in my first labor, my contractions were 15 minutes apart. Nothing too major, but I was having trouble sleeping through them. I tried though this time, unlike with my first labor, I made the mistake of not getting enough rest. So I slept as long as I could. I ended up getting up at 6:30 in the morning. Again, like in my first labor, I made some oatmeal breakfast cookies because that was a really nice way to start out labor. I ate some of those. I tried to sway a little with the contractions. And then again, just like in my first labor, labor totally stopped. And I was like, oh man. And this time with my second birth, I'd actually been having contractions that would last all night, multiple days in the week before. So I was like, oh, please not just more false labor. I really, really, really want to have this baby. So I decided to go on a walk, and I actually got my daughter May, who was 3, and I convinced her to sit in the stroller so I could take a nice quick walk. And I actually took an hour-long walk along the canals by our house. And during that walk, the contractions started up again. So I was like, oh, good. Okay, this is going to happen. And I had a feeling this was really going to be it because I hadn't really had any false contractions during the day. They'd always been like at night. But I decided to just go about my day. So we actually went, first, I think we went to a friend's house, and my daughter May actually had a play date. And I hung out with the mom, and the whole time having contraction just every 15 minutes. Nothing crazy, but basically felt like menstrual cramps. And then we actually went to a midwife appointment. I told the midwife I was having these contractions, and she said, oh, great. Well, maybe you'll go into labor in a few days. And I was like, oh, it's going to be sooner than that. And so then after that, we went shopping at Trader Joe's. And I think walking around Trader Joe's for an hour also really got things going. So we went home, and I had bought some frozen orange chicken, and Ian made that for dinner because I was not feeling up to cooking. Ate that and put May to bed. And then I think it was around 9 o'clock, Ian and I were actually doing work for our online classes that we were going to be teaching in the fall. And he said, you keep having these contractions. It seems, and I think at this point they'd moved to every 10 minutes. And he said, maybe it would be a good idea if you go to bed early and try to get some rest because you might be up in the middle of the night tonight. I said, yeah, that's a smart plan. So I went to sleep, and then I woke up at about 11:30 and still was having the contractions. And so I decided to go ahead and call my mom and our doula, Rochelle, and just let them know that, there was a possibility that at some point in the middle of the night or early in the morning, they might need to come. My mom was going to come pick up May and bring her back to her house. So I let them both know that. Then I went to sleep. I continued to have contractions every 10 minutes. I actually basically labored by myself in bed. At some point, May woke up and came into bed with us. So it was me, Ian, and May all in our big California king bed. And I was just silently having contractions, just breathing through them, trying to relax. And I did this by myself until 3:30 in the morning. Actually, about 2 o'clock, I had to go out in the living room because it was getting a little more intense. And so I leaned over the birth ball. And I was like making some low moaning noises and everything with my contractions, doing my breathing. I was drinking coconut water after every contraction. And I think this was key to the fact that I had a really, really excellent birth this time around. My first birth, I did not drink enough and I ended up getting dehydrated. And so in the hospital, I had to have an IV, which made me cold and shaky. And it was kind of a cascade of things that I didn't really enjoy. So I decided this time I'm going to make really darn sure that I don't get dehydrated. So I drank coconut water since it has electrolytes in it after every contraction. Sometimes I just had regular water, but I really love coconut water, so I drank a lot of that. Anyway, so I was doing that, and then it was at about 3:30 that I actually had to go wake up Ian because I really needed some help. So Ian came on in to the living room with me and he massaged my back during the contractions. He talked to me through them. This time, again, somewhere we kind of went wrong last time. Last time we tried to sleep in between contractions, but I would wake up with a new contraction, which just felt horrible. So this time, Ian used a handy little app on his phone so that while I would sleep between the contractions, he stayed awake. And when he saw that it was about time for another contraction, he would wake me up and start rubbing my back before the contraction started, which was infinitely better for me. And it was also nice for him that he got more sleep because I was able to kind of labor on my own for quite a while this time around. He also knew our doula was coming, so he would have a chance to get a break if he needed it later. I ate a cinnamon roll bagel, like a whole wheat cinnamon roll bagel from Trader Joe's, because I was actually feeling pretty hungry, so that was good, keeping up my energy. And we continued this until 6:30 when my daughter May got up and came into the living room and said, "Mommy and Daddy, what are you doing?" And we said, "Your sister's going to be born today." And she was so excited. And so at that point, I called my mom. I had really, even though I know it doesn't matter, but I had really not wanted to call my mom or Rochelle before like 6 or 6:30 a.m. So I called my mom and I said, "We're ready for you to come get May." She said, "I'll be there in a half hour." She lives about a half hour away. And then we called Rochelle and she said, "Let me just get my kids off to the babysitter and I'll come right over." And so May and I actually shared another one of those cinnamon roll bagel things. And I had more coconut water. And then my mom got there and May went off with her little Disney princess suitcase for her very first sleepover. And then what happened? So I took a shower and, I kind of got ready for the day. And then about at that point, Rochelle arrived and I was still doing really pretty well. But one thing that was super interesting was I had been kind of nervous. I had not wanted to have really very powerful contractions in front of May because I was afraid that the sound of my moaning would be kind of scary to her. And so I think my body just held off on really truly going into labor until she left, because literally the second that the door closed behind her, I had like a doubly powerful contraction and things just took off from that point. So that was just sort of fascinating to me. Anyway, so let's see, I was doing okay, but things got more intense. Contractions were now 8 minutes apart, and Rochelle suggested that I might want to take a bath. So Ian got me in the bathtub, and this was just my favorite part of the labor. I had this CD of ocean sounds that my Bradley method teacher Renee had given me, and so we played that, and he was just pouring warm water over my back, and I was just laying there in the bathtub, and it was like, I felt like I was at the beach. It was just this relaxing, absolutely beautiful moment. Maybe it was an hour though, I don't know. It was like I lost all sense of time at that point. And I actually went 10 minutes with no contraction, and then I had this like double peaking insane contraction, and things like super took off at that point. So I got out of the bathtub. I tried to labor on the toilet a little bit, but I was super uncomfortable. My legs started shaking. This was another thing that we had issues with in my first labor, which was also a Bradley method labor, in which ultimately went very well. But with my first labor, I got really shaky, and part of that I found out from my Bradley class was most likely due to low blood sugar. So Ian got me a honey stick, and miraculously I ate that honey and the shaking just stopped. And thank God, because what had happened in the first labor was that the shaking was so intense that I could no longer fully relax my body, which made me feel much more of the pain of the contractions. So this time around, it was great. I wasn't shaking, so I was able to much more fully relax my body during contractions. So anyway, I got dressed and stuff, and then I was laboring over the birth ball, and my doula said, maybe do you want to try walking around in your backyard? So we went outside in the backyard. Again, this was kind of lovely because I have a really pretty backyard and it was beautiful out. The plums were on the tree, and but unfortunately it was also Sacramento, so it was 90 degrees outside. So we walked around the backyard for a little bit, and then I was like, oh my God, I'm too hot. I got to go inside. So we went back inside, and I started feeling the sensation like I was going to pee myself every time I would have a contraction. And I told my doula this, and she said, well, if you're feeling that way, I think we need to call the hospital. I think at this point contractions were like 4 minutes apart, 4 or 5 minutes apart. So I called the hospital and I told them, contractions 4 or 5 minutes apart. I'm feeling like I have to pee. They wanted to listen to a contraction. And then the nurse was very like, oh, well, you know, if you want to come in, you can, or you can wait longer. It's up to you. And I thought, well, yeah, maybe I'll just go in, you know, it can't hurt. And this was Kaiser, South Sacramento that we were going to. So at this point, I start kind of freaking out. And, you know, now looking back on it, I should have maybe realized that I was actually much further along than I thought. With my first labor, which had progressed at about the same speed up until this point, we drove to the hospital a little later in the day, like 1 o'clock, and I was there and I didn't have my baby till 6. So I'm thinking, oh, I've got hours ahead of me. You know, we're going to go to the hospital and I'm going to be there for a good 4 hours before I have this baby. But I was really starting to have intense contractions and all this self-doubt, which, as you know, if you study Bradley method, is, you know, means you're starting transition. And so I started crying and I told them, my doula, I said, you know, I just feel like I'm doing so badly. And if I'm already having so much trouble now, how am I going to make it through the rest of labor? And she was so great. She said, like, you're doing amazing. If I came in here and saw you, I'd think you were in early labor. You know, you're doing so great. And they were Ian and my doula were just so nice to me, and they really reassured me. And so then we left for the hospital. Labor did not slow down in the car. I had a 2-minute long contraction in the car. It was insane. Had like, I think 4 or 5 contractions in the car. It was maybe a 15-minute drive to the hospital. We get there and we decide to follow the advice given in my Bradley class, which is to walk to labor and delivery. This was like the walk of hell, but I think it was so good that we did it because it totally sped up my labor. So mainly the only reason it was so awful is that it was just freaking like over 90 degrees outside. And it took a very long time to even get into the building because I'd have to stop every few seconds and have a contraction. So I was just so hot. And Ian would bend over and I would lean over his back, and then Rochelle would massage my back. And that was great because she gave amazing massages. So we're doing our thing. We're going into the hospital. About 5 separate people probably stopped us and said like, oh, you know, do you need a wheelchair? And we said, no, we're